Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is actually the fourth episode of The Secret of Love. And I'm providing these episodes based on a book called The Secret of Love, Unlock the Mystery, Unleash the Magic. And today, in the timing of the season and the holidays, I'm going to talk about unleashing the magic in the holidays. We are taping actually the day before Thanksgiving. So by the time you see this, we will be into Christmas time. And you will have already had your Thanksgiving meal, typically with family. So you'll learn from that experience and be able to bring it into future experiences. So I like the timing of this. And first, I want to thank the two people who called in after the last episode, thanking the station for providing this and saying that they loved the episodes of The Secret of Love. So thank you to Mike and thank you to Anonymous. Anybody can call in, and you can call in as anonymous. That's perfectly fine. We love to hear feedback, and also anything that you would like me to focus on. I hope to have colleagues and maybe even students of the three principles come and join me at some point. And we love to hear what you would most like to hear about under the topic of love, which is basically everything when you think about it. That it all starts with that feeling of love that then has a ripple effect, affects other people, and brings your own spirits to a higher place where humans function better. We learned about this back in 1973 when Mr. Sidney Banks uncovered the three principles of mind, thought, and consciousness, that all people operate the same way, no matter what age, no matter where on the planet they're from, no matter what their background or their sociology is. That we experience, we feel our own thinking every single moment from birth to death. It's not that we're feeling the person sitting across from us who is taunting us, and they may think they're teasing, but we're taking it as a criticism. That's our thinking that's giving us the experience of being criticized. And it's their thinking that's giving them the experience of whatever it is, teasing, what have you. So we're going to start out by talking about expectations. The expectations you put on yourself and the expectations you put on others, which is really a deal breaker in the holidays especially, because it causes stress, takes the magic out of the holidays because you're feeling stressed, like you have to perform or set a table better than your great Aunt Mildred set her table for generations. And you might have somebody sitting at the table who experienced those wonderful holiday gatherings that great Aunt Mildred provided. Well, that's a lot of stress to be thinking about competition, and it's not going to bring out the best in you. If you want to bring out the best in yourself and in your guests, there is only one thing to consider. And that thing is getting yourself into a nice feeling. And now, we slip into nice feelings when we're not thinking insecure thoughts. That's natural. So all you have to do is not believe in the insecure thinking that you do. And we all do that. That's humanity, to have these insecure thoughts. But when you know that it's not reality, it's not truth, it feels like reality, that's because of mind, thought, and consciousness, creating a real feeling in the moment. When you know that, when you have some basic understanding for that, and let me tell you, I've been a student of the principles. You might be a practitioner of them, but all practitioners are lifelong students, because it's seeing how life works within ourselves. That's what we relate to. That's how life works, that we feel our own thinking. And we can think something really negative on Thursday and even enter into a fight, an argument with someone, and on Friday morning, we're seeing it really differently. Has anybody had that experience? Honestly, anyone I've ever talked to has had that experience, and certainly I have. So the great thing about knowing this is that it's wise not to go forward, not to go full speed ahead when you're feeling negativity. And having expectations of yourselves or your hostess is not a good idea, because that's negativity, insecurity for yourself, if you're having grandiose expectations for how you provide things at a gathering, or if you're judging the hostess or the guests, that's going to give you a bad feeling. The opposite of a beautiful feeling, in fact, is judgment. In fact, I marked off, we have a quote in this book by the Dalai Lama, and it's very short. Love is the absence of judgment. It's page 64. Love is the absence of judgment. Think about it. When you're not in judgment of somebody else, which is just your little critical brain, the brain analyzes and judges and critiques and compares, and it has to do that in order to figure out the shortest distance from point A to point B when you're driving to a party or to work or wherever. But it is not only unnecessary, it's not a good idea to use that function of the brain when you're with people, when you're relating to people, when you're in the company of people, and when you're alone by yourself. So we go into it, we start getting caught up in thoughts of judgment, but man, the way to catch it is the feeling. It's a yucky feeling. It doesn't feel good. It's not high-spirited, it's not high-minded. And if you go forward with it, it's like you're taking the low road. It's best to take the high road in a better state of mind. So the thing about, here's something I want to point out. The word enjoy? If you go to a gathering, whether it's your own or somebody else's party, if you go with the mind of enjoying yourself, that puts a different spin on things, because enjoyment does not depend on who the other guests are, who got invited and who didn't get invited. Enjoying something does not have to do with the food or the spread or the conversation. It has to do with you, with each one of us, the person attending the gathering. Because, as the principles show us, life comes through us, not at us. Our experience of life is coming through us, through our own thinking. It's not a static image of life out there. If it was, everybody would feel the same thing when faced with the same person, when faced with the same event. Separate realities. We talked about that last episode. And the word enjoyment, or the word enjoy, comes from the Latin, to put joy in. Isn't that interesting? Putting joy in to a situation just by showing up in a good state of mind, without worry, without stress, without expectation on your mind, because that is what covers up a nice feeling. A nice feeling is like the sun It's always out, it's always shining, even when it's covered with a total cloud cover in the sky and you cannot see the sun. You can't see the sun in the night sky. It's there though, it doesn't go anywhere. That's our innate health, and that's our nice feelings. It's our default setting, doesn't go anywhere, but it gets covered up with the negative, insecure, personal thinking that we do. It'll get covered up. And the cloud of cloudy thinking will move a lot quicker when you don't buy into it, when you don't start working it, when you don't start thinking about those thoughts, because that'll just bring you down further into the trenches. Half the time there's really nothing to think about. If there is, it'll be there once you're rested, feeling better, in a higher state of mind, then revisit the topic. And it's a little tricky though, because when we're not feeling good, we can convince ourselves that we're in great shape here and we've got to go forward with this. Well, if you feel compelled to go forward with something, which doesn't mean that you wouldn't sit in a nice frame of mind and compose a letter or an op-ed or something of that nature, and then reread it the next morning. Make sure you don't send it off, because it's really tricky sometimes. We can convince ourselves that we're good, we're in a good state of mind, but there's still that edge there that I would call it, one-upping. I can't quite find the right word. You may find it for me. That feeling of being, knowing more than somebody else knows. Righteousness, that's the word. That self-righteous feeling that we're somehow better than somebody else on the planet, and we're not. We're all given the same mind, thought, and consciousness, and it's what we do with it. It's the only thing that separates us is our individual understanding of that fact, that really psychological, spiritual fact of life, that we all, every single individual human, experiences life according to the thinking that's on their mind in the moment, because consciousness brings that to life. It's like, life becomes the grand canvas, that we're really the artist painting the canvas through how we're thinking about those things. I think I'll read a little quote by the person who inspired this book, Sydney Banks. He's the late Sydney Banks. He's no longer here with us, but what he left for humanity is just beautiful and has touched so many lives. In fact, once I read this, I'm going to give you a little bit of before and afters. My before, my after, and also colleagues and students and clients of mine, how people change just from this understanding. But, the thing about, before I read the quote, I want to speak a little about how we will bring the past into the present, right? So sometimes family members and even good friends and spouses will get into disagreements that could last hours, weeks, even sometimes years. I mean, have you known people who were really close, maybe family members, maybe best friends, and they get into an issue where feelings get hurt and they hold it against the other person, sometimes for years. It's mind-boggling once you have an understanding that it's just their thinking and it's just your thinking. It doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. It's just different ways of seeing the same thing. And when you see that, it takes the personal out of it. You see the impersonal nature of thought so that you're not taking things personally. You just get intrigued or interested that the other person saw it that way. So let's say that you had a thing go on in the past with a family member or a close person to you. You love them, but your negative thinking got in the way, and then you both show up at the same event. I've heard people say, they can't be in the same room as their ex. I mean, what happens when you have the daughter that you share having a graduation or a wedding? You want to put the past in the past, leave it there. So here's a good quote that refers to that by Sydney Banks. The past is a thought carried through time that can distort our life in the present. Memory is thought in the present of something we think happened in the past, something we think happened in the past. Memories cannot represent the truth any more than thoughts in the present represent the truth. The only truth is that we have the ability to think, and everything we think appears real and true because of consciousness. Memory is also colored by the present state of mind. When you're in a more negative state of mind, your past could look pretty bad. And when you're feeling better, you start to remember good things that happened in your life. What comes to mind is a story that I heard Sid Banks repeat in a lecture of his years ago, which was how he grew up. He was adopted. And earlier in his life, before he gained this understanding, he would look back at his childhood and he would think, boy, my adoptive parents were not very kind. And he had a memory of playing with those toy soldiers, the little models, and on this very cold cement floor. So he had a memory of growing up in this very cold environment. Well, guess what? He has this experience. He sees thought, and he hears something from somewhere, some relative, I guess, that puts a whole different spin on it. He finds out that he grew up in a castle, in Scotland. I know he grew up in Scotland. I don't think he was a wealthy person, but this, sometimes castles are let to go to the weeds, I guess you might say, unless somebody will buy them. That was his memory, that instead of seeing, though, what a lucky boy to be able to play with toy soldiers in a castle. It really just, we spin how we see things, not just the news putting a spin on things. The spin comes from our perception, from the way we're using our ability to think, and consciousness shining the light on what we think. So knowing that, we realize that we are always living our own perception. And we don't have to be frightened by that perception. There's a wonderful psychiatrist in the Midwest, in Phoenix, Arizona, Dr. Bill Pettit. YouTube him. He's got beautiful YouTubes. Bill and Linda Pettit, psychiatrist, and especially a series that I love that they put out is called Never Broken, Never Lacking, something like that. So Bill would use, I brought him to Hartford a few years back to offer a 2-day seminar. And I love this image that he provided. He said, you know, it's kind of like somebody making shadow puppets on the wall and getting afraid of the puppet, you know, the shadow on the wall, not realizing that it's coming from their own hand. So we get afraid of the illusions that we create that are in our own mind. We're the creator. I was delighted to participate in a webinar last week, I think it was. And it was a webinar on the holiday magic that I provided with my co-author and good friend and colleague, Christine Heath. Let's take a peek at that for a moment.
One of the things that I would, when I was going into the holiday, whatever it was always, I had a lot of positive thinking about what was going to happen. You know, like somehow being with my family and having this celebration, like I'd get these ideas in my head that somehow that was going to make me happy. And that if everybody acted appropriately, then I would be happy. So of course, what would happen is I would go and get really insecure because I wasn't happy and then think it was everybody else's fault. So then I'd be like into poor me and I have this crazy family and, you know, it's like I'll never have any happiness, blah, blah, blah. So it all became about this idea that I thought that happiness or, you know, joy, peace, and love came from the holiday rather than seeing that it came from me. So one of the things that I think people do is they start thinking that their good feeling is coming from the rituals that they do or the food that they eat or the presents that they get or that they give, that somehow that's where love comes from. That's where the feeling of the holiday comes from. And as long as we get focused outside of ourselves like that, we end up invariably getting stressed out and losing that feeling, right? So it becomes about doing things and making them turn out in a certain way, like you said, Lori. But it's like the most powerful thing for me, I remember, because I was introduced to the principles by Roger Mills in December of in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I remember that I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. And then Christmas came and I thought, oh, this will be interesting. And it was interesting because I had been in therapy, right, with a psychologist, and I had changed so much that she told me that I had to come back in a month because she thought I had a hysterical conversion. And so I was going to see her after Christmas. And so the Christmas came and I went to my sister's house and spent time with my mother, and I didn't get upset with anybody. I didn't get angry with anybody. In fact, I was in just this great feeling. And I was talking to my sister afterwards and I said to her, I said, gosh, I did really well. Didn't you think I did really well at Christmas? I was so proud of myself because I didn't get in a fight with anybody. And she said, yeah, you only left us once. I said, I did? When did I do that? She said, well, you took a nap. I said, oh yeah, I took a nap, that's right. But evidently, I didn't even know this, that every Christmas I would go away. I'd have to leave everybody because I couldn't handle my own thinking about how they should be, which is really funny when you think about it. So anyway, after that, it was just like such a great feeling. And I realized that all of the unhappiness that I'd lived in was just my own thinking. It was, and then memories of each Christmas after that, because it would be another bad memory that would pile up on each other. So I went to my therapist in between Christmas and New Year's, and I went in to see her, and she said, you're still okay? You made it through Christmas? And I said, yeah, it was great. I had the best Christmas I've ever had in my life. And she said, oh, okay, well, I guess it must be real then. And it was funny because she just couldn't go to the place of looking at it anything differently.
So the before and the after that I experienced, which continues, is I mean, I'm not even the same person I was. Say, I first started, the first lecture I went to of SIDS was back in 1985, so you can imagine. Oh boy. You know, it's just such a difference. I would sit at family gatherings back in 1985, and I can tell you I'd get offended a lot. Let's just put it that way, a lot. And looking back, it's really funny because I see the innocence, you know. We're innocent humans when we don't have this understanding. We're just doing the best we can given how things look to us. So I'd get into arguments, and I would try to, you know, force my way of thinking down people's throats. I wasn't really that bad, but, you know, comparatively. And, you know, now I still will get, you know, I'll feel a little twinge, but I'll recognize what that twinge means. The twinge means that I am misunderstanding something, or I can check it out with the speaker and find out if what they mean is actually what I think they mean. That's what I teach the couples I work with. Check it out if you feel offended, and don't check it out when you're both in a bad mood, because your partner's going to say, yes, that is what I meant. Check it out with them when you're settled down. And I guess we're almost running out of time. So there's one little thing I want to, boy, the time just flies so fast. Okay, so I want to read this quote as an ending. And again, you know, please comment to me at Lori@3principlestherapy.com. It's the number 3 and principles as in PLES, meaning a principle like gravity. By the way, I didn't mention that in this episode, that a principle, the way they're used for mind, thought, and consciousness is that a principle is true everywhere on the planet, no matter where or with who. So that's really important. It's not like a principle, PAL, to follow. Actually, that would also be, I have to look that up. I have to Google that before I speak about it. So here's a quote on the chapter headed The Feeling of Love. It's at the end, page 161. Your own inner beauty will increase and grow as you recognize the beauty in others. The quality may not always seem evident, but I believe you are wise enough to know that everyone has a spark of the divine spirit which they need only allow to come forth. You know, I just love that. And, you know, that what's so beautiful about that is that everybody has innate health. We can bring out the best in ourselves and others, or we can bring out the worst in ourselves and others. So I hope you have a wonderful holiday. I hope something has hit true for you, that you were able to have some insights for yourself listening to this show, and that you can have a really heartfelt, beautiful holiday. Thanks. Hope to see you next month.